Marcus Reed thought he was meeting an ordinary woman for coffee, until two bodyguards escorted him into a luxury penthouse where Eleanor Whitmore waited, her billions casting shadows over what should have been simple love. She'd hidden her wealth, terrified that money was all anyone ever wanted from her, while he'd lived his entire life believing people like her existed in a different universe. But when Eleanor's powerful family discovered their secret romance, they didn't just disapprove, they declared war, threatening to destroy Marcus's business, his home, and everything he'd worked for unless Eleanor walked away. Now she faces the ultimate choice: the safety of her gilded cage or the risk of real love with a man her family will never accept. What Eleanor doesn't know is that her decision will set off a chain of events that will expose family secrets, test the true meaning of love, and prove that sometimes the greatest battles are fought not for money or power, but for the right to choose your own heart. If you're watching this, subscribe and tell me where you're from, because this love story is about to get dangerous. Marcus Reed wiped the sweat from his forehead as he packed up his tools. The afternoon sun beat down on the suburban driveway, where he'd just finished installing a new security system. Another long day, another satisfied customer. He loved his work. There was something honest about protecting people's homes, making them feel safe. His phone buzzed as he loaded his van. A text from Eleanor. "Still on for coffee tomorrow? I promise I'm not as boring as my messages probably make me seem." Marcus smiled despite his tiredness. They'd been texting for 3 weeks now, ever since Ben had insisted he try that dating app. Eleanor seemed different from the women he usually met. Polite, thoughtful, no drama. Her messages were always simple and sweet. Nothing flashy or demanding. He typed back quickly. "Looking forward to it. What time works for you?" Her response came fast. "How about 2 p.m.? I know a nice place. Sounds perfect. See you then." Marcus drove home through the familiar streets of his neighborhood. Kids played on front porches while their parents watched from lawn chairs. Mrs. Johnson waved from her garden, and he honked his horn in greeting. This was his world, simple, real, comfortable. At home, he showered and heated up leftover pizza. His small apartment wasn't much to look at, but it was his. He'd worked hard for everything in it, from the second-hand couch to the flat-screen TV he'd saved up for last Christmas. His phone buzzed again. Eleanor. "Actually, I'll send a car, just easier." Marcus stared at the message. A car. That seemed a bit much for coffee. Maybe she didn't have her own transportation. Or maybe she was just being thoughtful. He'd grown up taking the bus everywhere. Having someone offer a ride was actually pretty nice. "Sure, thanks. I'll text you my address." He sent his location and settled in for the night. Tomorrow would be interesting. After 3 weeks of messages, he'd finally meet the woman behind the friendly texts. Eleanor seemed sweet and normal. Exactly the kind of person he could see himself with. No games, no drama, just good conversation and maybe something more. The next morning, Marcus stood outside his apartment building, checking his phone for the 3rd time. Eleanor had said the car would arrive at 1:30, giving them plenty of time to get to wherever they were going for coffee. A sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb. Marcus blinked. This wasn't what he'd expected. The car looked expensive, really expensive. The kind of car he installed security systems in, not the kind he rode in. 2 men in dark suits got out. One opened the back door while the other scanned the street with sharp eyes. They both had the look of guys who took their jobs very seriously. "Marcus Reed?" the first man asked. "Yeah, that's me." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. This whole thing felt wrong, like he was stepping into someone else's life by mistake. "Ma'am sent us to pick you up." "Ma'am? Who talked like that?" Marcus almost backed away, almost told them he'd changed his mind. But curiosity won over caution. Maybe Eleanor had just borrowed someone's car and driver. Maybe she worked for someone rich and got to use their stuff sometimes. "Okay," he said, walking toward the open door. "Thanks." He slid into the back seat, immediately sinking into leather softer than his own bed. The car smelled like money. That clean, expensive scent he noticed in the fancy houses where he worked. As they pulled away from his building, Marcus texted Ben, "Getting picked up in a car that costs more than I make in a year. This woman might be out of my league." Ben's response came quickly. "Maybe she's just being nice. Don't overthink it." Easy for Ben to say. Ben had never worried about fitting in anywhere. Marcus watched his neighborhood disappear in the rearview mirror as they drove through increasingly wealthy areas. The houses got bigger, the lawns got greener, and his unease grew stronger. The two men in front said almost nothing. When Marcus tried to make conversation, they answered with polite but short responses. They were professionals, he realized. This wasn't just someone doing Eleanor a favor. These guys were paid to drive people around. "So, how long have you worked for Eleanor?" Marcus tried again. "For the family," the driver corrected. "Several years." "Family, of course." Marcus stared out the window as they entered downtown. Not just downtown, the part of downtown where buildings reached toward the sky like glass mountains. Where people paid more for parking than he spent on groceries. His phone buzzed. "Eleanor, hope the ride is comfortable. See you soon." He typed back, "Very comfortable." "Thanks." But comfortable wasn't the word. He felt like a fish out of water, like he was pretending to be someone he wasn't. When they stopped at red lights, he caught glimpses of himself in the window reflection. Work clothes, calloused hands, worry lines around his eyes. The car turned into a circular driveway in front of a building that stretched so high, Marcus had to crane his neck to see the top. A doorman in a uniform that probably cost more than Marcus's rent stepped forward to open the car door. "Mr. Reed," the doorman said with a polite smile. "Right this way, sir." How did he know Marcus's name? How did any of this make sense? The two men who'd driven him flanked him as they walked through a lobby that looked like a museum. Marble floors, crystal chandeliers, artwork that belonged in magazines. Other people moved through the space like they belonged there, wearing clothes that fit perfectly and carrying themselves with quiet confidence. Marcus followed the men to a private elevator. One of them used a key card to make it work. As they rode up, Marcus counted floors on the digital display. 10, 20, 30. The elevator didn't stop until they reached the very top. When the doors opened, Marcus stepped directly into someone's home. Not a hallway or lobby, an actual living room with floor-to-ceiling windows that showed the entire city spread out below. And there, standing by those impossible windows, was Eleanor. She turned when she heard the elevator, and Marcus's breath caught. She was beautiful. That much he'd expected from her photos. But seeing her here, in this place, made him understand that everything he'd thought about her had been wrong. Eleanor wore a simple blue dress that probably cost more than his car payment. Her blonde hair was pulled back in a way that looked effortless, but probably took an hour to achieve. She belonged in this space the way Marcus belonged in his work van. "Marcus," she said, walking toward him with a nervous smile. "I'm so glad you came." She was nervous. Why was she nervous? She lived in the sky and had people driving her around in cars that cost more than Marcus made in a year. What did she have to be nervous about? Eleanor. He managed to find his voice. "Nice place." She looked around as if seeing it for the first time. "Thank you. I should have told you." "Told me what?" She gestured vaguely at the penthouse around them. "About all this. About who I am." Marcus felt something click into place. The car, the security, the way everyone knew his name. Eleanor wasn't just some woman with a nice job. She was rich. Really, seriously rich. "I wanted to meet you first," she continued, wrapping her arms around herself. "Before you knew about the money. I wanted you to get to know me, just me, without all of this getting in the way." Marcus looked around the penthouse again. The furniture, the art, The view. Everything spoke of wealth so far beyond his experience that he might as well have been on another planet. "So you lied to me," he said quietly. "No." Her response was quick, almost desperate. "I never lied. I just didn't tell you everything. There's a difference." Was there? Marcus thought about their text conversations, how normal she'd seemed. How she'd asked about his work and his day, like she cared about ordinary things. Had any of that been real? "I'm afraid," Eleanor said suddenly. "Do you want to know the truth? I'm afraid that when people find out about the money, that's all they see. They don't see me anymore. They see what I can give them or what I represent. I've had people pretend to care about me when all they really wanted was access to this." She gestured around the room again. Marcus studied her face. She looked scared, vulnerable in a way that didn't match the powerful setting. Maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she really had been trying to protect something fragile between them. "We could still have coffee," she offered. "I mean, if you want to. I know this probably isn't what you expected." That was the understatement of the century. But Marcus found himself nodding. He'd come this far. And despite everything, the shock, the confusion, the feeling that he was way out of his league, he still wanted to know the real Eleanor. If there was a real Eleanor underneath all this wealth. "Okay," he said. "Let's have coffee." Her smile was worth the risk of feeling completely out of place. Maybe Ben was right. Maybe he was overthinking things. Maybe it didn't matter where they came from, as long as they could find something genuine between them. But as Eleanor led him toward a dining area that overlooked the city, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that he'd walked into a story where he didn't belong, where no matter how kind she seemed, he would always be the guy who installed security systems while she was the woman who owned the penthouse. The coffee was perfect, served in cups that probably cost more than his weekly grocery budget. But as they sat across from each other, Marcus found himself wondering if perfect was what he really wanted after all. Eleanor poured coffee from a silver pot that caught the afternoon light streaming through floor-to-ceiling windows. The cups were delicate china, the kind Marcus's grandmother would have called good dishes, and saved for special occasions that never came. "Cream? Sugar?" Eleanor asked, her voice carefully polite. "Black is fine." Marcus wrapped his hands around the warm cup, grateful for something to hold. The dining room felt too big, too formal. Like they were actors on a stage performing politeness for an invisible audience. Eleanor added cream to her own cup, stirring slowly. She kept glancing at him, then looking away. The nervous energy between them was thick enough to cut. "So," Marcus said, because someone had to break the silence, "how long have you lived here?" 3 years. My grandmother left it to me when she passed." Eleanor stared into her coffee. "Before that, I lived in a regular apartment. Well, regular for me. Probably still fancier than most people's places." At least she was honest about that. Marcus appreciated honesty, even when it highlighted the gap between their worlds. "What do you do for work?" he asked. "I manage some of my family's investments. Nothing too exciting. A lot of meetings and paperwork." She looked up at him. "What about you? I mean, I know you install security systems, but do you like it?" The question seemed genuine, so Marcus relaxed a little. "Yeah, I do. I like helping people feel safe in their homes. And I like working with my hands, solving problems. Every house is different. Every family has different needs. That sounds meaningful." "It is." Marcus took a sip of coffee. It was good. Better than anything he'd ever tasted. "I get to meet people, see how they live. Sometimes I'm the guy who helps a single mom feel secure, or I help elderly folks stay in their own house instead of moving somewhere they don't want to be." Eleanor smiled, the first real smile he'd seen from her since he arrived. "That's beautiful. You're making a real difference in people's lives. What about you? Do you like what you do?" She considered the question seriously. "I'm good at it. and it's important to my family that I be involved. But meaningful? I don't know. I sit in boardrooms talking about numbers while other people do the actual work. Marcus heard something sad in her voice. Sounds lonely. It can be. She met his eyes. That's why I wanted to meet you somewhere normal first. I wanted to talk to someone who didn't know about all this, who would just see me as Eleanor. I'm still seeing you as Eleanor, Marcus said. Just Eleanor who happens to live in the clouds. That earned him a laugh. I guess that's one way to put it. They talked more easily after that. Eleanor asked about his family, his neighborhood, his friends. She seemed genuinely interested in his answers. Not like she was studying him, but like she really wanted to know. In return, she told him about growing up with wealth, how it felt like living behind glass sometimes. People either want something from you, or they're intimidated by you, she said. I never know which reaction I'm going to get. And what reaction were you expecting from me? Honestly, I thought you might run. She laughed, but it sounded nervous. I thought you'd take one look at all this and decide I was too much trouble. Marcus looked around the penthouse again. She wasn't wrong. Part of him wanted to run. This world felt as foreign to him as outer space. But Eleanor herself didn't feel foreign. Sitting across from him, worrying about his reaction, she seemed as normal and uncertain as anyone. I'm still here, he pointed out. You are. She smiled. Thank you for that. They finished their coffee as the sun moved lower in the sky. The city spread out below them like a map, all those lives happening in buildings and streets that looked tiny from this height. Marcus wondered what his apartment looked like from up here, if it was even visible. When it was time to go, Eleanor walked him back to the elevator. The two security men were waiting, professional and silent. Can I see you again? Eleanor asked as the elevator doors opened. Marcus hesitated. He wanted to say yes. He'd enjoyed talking with her more than he'd expected. But he also felt the weight of everything he didn't understand about her life, about what dating someone like her would mean. I'd like that, he said finally. But maybe somewhere a little more. Down to earth next time? Her relief was obvious. Yes, absolutely. I know a great cafe downtown. Very normal, very ordinary. Sounds perfect. As the elevator carried him back down to street level, Marcus felt his head spinning. Eleanor was nothing like what he'd imagined, but in ways both good and complicated. She was kind, smart, genuine, and she lived in a world that might as well have been another planet. The ride home gave him time to think. The city changed around him as they drove, getting more familiar with every mile. By the time they reached his neighborhood, the penthouse felt like something from a dream. Ben was waiting on Marcus's front steps when he got out of the car. Well, he said, as the black sedan drove away. How did it go? I have no idea, Marcus said honestly. Come on up. I need to tell someone about this, and you're not going to believe it. In his apartment, Marcus told Ben everything. About the penthouse, the security, the way Eleanor had seemed nervous despite having everything money could buy. So she's rich, Ben said when Marcus finished. Really rich. Really, really rich. Ben, this woman has people whose job it is to drive other people around. She has art on her walls that probably costs more than we'll make in our entire lives. But did you like her? That was the question, wasn't it? Yeah, Marcus admitted. I did. When we were just talking, she felt normal. Real. Like the woman I'd been texting with for 3 weeks. Then what's the problem? Marcus stared at the ceiling. The problem is that I don't know how to be in her world. I don't know the rules. I don't know what's expected. What if I embarrass her? What if I embarrass myself? What if you just be yourself and see what happens? Easy for you to say. You've never been picked up by bodyguards and taken to a penthouse in the sky. Ben was quiet for a moment. You know what I think? I think you're scared. Of course I'm scared. Did you miss the part about the penthouse? Not of the penthouse, of her. You like her, and that scares you because you might actually have something real here. Something worth risking looking stupid for. Marcus wanted to argue, but Ben knew him too well. Yes, he was intimidated by Eleanor's wealth. But more than that, he was afraid of caring about someone whose life was so different from his own. What if he let himself fall for her, and then realized they could never really fit together? His phone buzzed. A text from Eleanor. Thank you for staying, for giving me a chance to explain. Would you like to try that cafe tomorrow? Somewhere we can just be two people having coffee? Marcus stared at the message. Ben was right. He was scared. But maybe being scared wasn't a reason to walk away. Maybe it was a reason to see what could happen if he was brave enough to try. Yes, he typed back. I'd like that very much. Her response came quickly. Great, I promise. No cars, no security, no surprises. Just Eleanor and Marcus. Looking forward to it. And despite all his fears and uncertainties, Marcus realized he really was looking forward to it. Tomorrow they'd meet on neutral ground. They'd see if what he'd felt in that penthouse dining room was real, or just the effect of being completely overwhelmed. As Ben headed home and Marcus got ready for bed, he found himself hoping it was real. Eleanor had seemed as nervous as he felt, as uncertain about what they were doing. Maybe that was enough to build something on. Two people, both a little scared, both willing to see where honesty might take them. The next morning couldn't come fast enough. Eleanor stood in front of her bedroom mirror, changing clothes for the third time. Everything she owned suddenly looked too expensive, too obvious. The simple black dress screamed designer. The jeans and sweater combination looked like she was trying too hard to appear casual. Finally, she settled on dark jeans and a plain white t-shirt. The most normal things she owned. She pulled her hair back in a simple ponytail and left her jewelry on the nightstand. In the elevator mirror, she almost looked like a regular person. Almost. Rosa Martinez, her house manager, was arranging flowers in the lobby when Eleanor stepped off the elevator. Rosa had worked for Eleanor's family for 10 years, long enough to read Eleanor's moods like weather patterns. You look nervous, mija, Rosa said, not looking up from the lilies she was arranging. I'm meeting someone for coffee. The same someone who came yesterday? The one who made you smile at dinner? Eleanor paused. How did you know I was smiling? You hummed while you ate. You never hum. Rosa looked up with knowing eyes. He's different from the others, yes? Very different. Eleanor smoothed her shirt nervously. Rosa, what if I mess this up? By being yourself? By being too much myself? Too much. This. Eleanor gestured around the luxurious lobby. What if he can't handle it? Rosa set down her flowers and gave Eleanor her full attention. Mija, listen to me. If this man runs away because you have money, then he's not the right man. And if he stays only because you have money, he's definitely not the right man. You want someone who stays for Eleanor, not for what Eleanor owns. Eleanor hugged Rosa impulsively. Thank you. I needed to hear that. Go have coffee. Be yourself. See what happens. The cafe Eleanor had chosen was 15 blocks away, close enough to walk, normal enough to blend in. She'd discovered it by accident 6 months ago when her car had broken down nearby. It was the kind of place where people came to work on laptops or meet friends, where nobody looked twice at anyone else. She arrived 10 minutes early and chose a corner table where she could watch the door. Her hands shook slightly as she checked her phone. No messages from Marcus. What if he changed his mind? What if yesterday had been too much, too overwhelming? At exactly 2 o'clock, Marcus walked through the door. Eleanor's breath caught. Without the shock of the penthouse, without the formal setting, she could really see him. He was tall, solidly built from physical work, with kind eyes and a careful way of moving. He wore jeans and a blue button-down shirt that brought out his dark skin beautifully. Their eyes met across the room, and he smiled. Relief flooded through Eleanor as she waved him over. "Eleanor," he slid into the chair across from her. "This is much more my speed." "Mine too, actually." She realized she meant it. The cafe felt comfortable in a way her penthouse never did. "I'm not as fancy as my address might suggest." "Good to know." Marcus looked around the cafe. Students studying, friends catching up, people living ordinary lives. So this is how normal Eleanor spends her time. When I can escape. She caught herself. "Sorry, that sounds terrible, doesn't it? Complaining about having too much money." "A little bit," Marcus said honestly. "But I get what you mean. Money doesn't fix everything." Eleanor appreciated that he didn't pretend to fully understand what he couldn't understand. "What would you like?" "Coffee's on me." "I can pay for my own coffee, Eleanor." There was something firm in his voice that made her pause. "I didn't mean. I wasn't trying to." "I know." His expression softened. "I just want to be clear about something. I work for my living. I pay my own way. That's important to me." Eleanor nodded, feeling heat creep up her neck. She'd already made a mistake, and they'd been sitting together for less than 5 minutes. "I understand. I'll have a latte." "Thank you." Marcus went to the counter while Eleanor watched through the window. People walked by on the sidewalk, carrying shopping bags, talking on phones, living lives that looked manageable and real. When was the last time she'd felt like that? When had her own life started feeling like something that happened to her, instead of something she chose? Marcus returned with their drinks and a chocolate chip cookie on a small plate. "Thought we could share," he said, "if you want to." "I'd like that." They broke the cookie in half, and Eleanor realized it was the first thing she'd eaten all day that hadn't been prepared by someone else. It tasted better because of that. Sweet and simple and real. "So," Marcus said, "tell me about normal Eleanor. What does she do when she's not managing investments?" Eleanor thought about it. "I read. I watch cooking shows even though I barely cook. I take long walks when I can get away from everything." "What about you? What does Marcus do when he's not making people feel safe?" "I play basketball with my neighbors. I fix things around my building. The landlord's not great with repairs. I hang out with Ben and argue about movies." Marcus smiled. "Nothing exciting." "It sounds wonderful," Eleanor said, and meant it. "It sounds like you actually live your life instead of just managing it." "Is that what you feel like? Like you're managing your life?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "Sometimes. There are a lot of expectations, you know? About how I should act, who I should spend time with, what I should care about. It gets exhausting." "What do you want to care about?" The question was so simple and so impossible. When was the last time anyone had asked her what she wanted? "I want to care about people, real relationships, work that matters. I want to care about someone who cares about me, not about what I can do for them." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Is that why you didn't tell me about the money right away?" "Yes. I wanted you to know me first. Just me." "And now that I know?" Eleanor felt her heart speed up. This was it, the moment when he'd decide if she was worth the complications that came with her life. "Now you get to decide if just me is enough to deal with everything else that comes with me." Marcus looked at her for a long time. She fought the urge to fill the silence with explanations or apologies. Instead, she waited, letting him see whatever he needed to see. "I like just you," he said finally. "You're kind and smart and funny. You ask good questions. You seem lonely in a way that has nothing to do with money." Eleanor's chest tightened. Lonely wasn't a word she'd expected, but it felt true. I am lonely. So am I sometimes. Maybe that's something we have in common. They talked until the coffee grew cold and the afternoon light slanted low through the windows. Eleanor learned that Marcus had grown up in the same neighborhood where he lived now, that his parents had died in a car accident when he was 25, that he'd used their life insurance to start his business. Marcus learned that Eleanor had studied art history but never used her degree, that she felt guilty about having money she hadn't earned, that she dreamed sometimes of disappearing and starting over somewhere nobody knew her name. When it was time to go, they walked slowly toward the cafe door, neither wanting the afternoon to end. "Can I see you again?" Marcus asked as they stood on the sidewalk. "I was hoping you'd ask." "How about dinner tomorrow? I'll pick the place this time." Eleanor smiled. "I'd love that. But Marcus..." "Yeah? I'll meet you there. No cars, no drivers. Just me, showing up like a normal person." His grin was worth every risk she was taking. "Deal. Just don't be surprised if normal isn't as fancy as you're used to." "Good. I'm tired of fancy." As they parted ways, Marcus toward the bus stop, Eleanor toward her car 2 blocks away. Eleanor felt lighter than she had in months. For 3 hours, she'd been just Eleanor. Not Eleanor Whitmore, not the granddaughter of wealth, not someone to be managed or protected or impressed. Just Eleanor, having coffee with Marcus, sharing a cookie and talking about real things. She could get used to that feeling. She wanted to get used to it. Tomorrow night couldn't come fast enough. Marcus chose Tony's Diner for dinner, a neighborhood place where the coffee was strong, the portions were generous, and nobody cared what you wore as long as you were polite to the waitress. He'd been eating there since he was a kid, when his mom would take him for pancakes on Saturday mornings. He arrived 15 minutes early and slid into his usual booth by the window. The red vinyl seats were cracked with age, and the table wobbled if you leaned on it too hard, but the place felt like home. Families filled most of the other booths, kids coloring on paper placemats while their parents talked over coffee. At exactly 7 o'clock, Eleanor walked through the door. Marcus's breath caught. She'd kept her promise about showing up like a normal person. Simple jeans, a soft green sweater, hair loose around her shoulders. She looked beautiful and approachable, and completely out of place in Tony's Diner. But she was here. She'd come to his world this time. Eleanor spotted him and smiled, weaving between tables toward his booth. A few people glanced at her. She had that kind of presence, but mostly she blended in. Just another woman meeting someone for dinner. "This place is perfect," she said, sliding across from him. "It feels so real." "Real is about all Tony's has going for it," Marcus said. "But the food's good, and they've never kicked me out for staying too long." Eleanor picked up the laminated menu. "What do you recommend?" "Meatloaf's the best thing on the menu, but if you're feeling adventurous, try the chili. Fair warning, though, it's not for beginners." "I'll risk the chili," Marcus grinned. Brave woman. Their waitress, Diane, had been working at Tony's for 20 years. She knew Marcus's order before he opened his mouth. "The usual, honey? And what can I get for your friend?" "The usual sounds good, and she'll have the chili, with extra crackers." "You sure about that, dear?" Diane asked Eleanor. "That chili's got some kick to it." "I'm sure," Eleanor said. "Though maybe bring extra water, too." Diane laughed and headed back to the kitchen. Marcus watched Eleanor look around the diner. Really look, like she was trying to memorize it. The families, the worn booths, the photos of local high school football teams covering the walls. "You come here a lot?" she asked. "Once or twice a week. Diane always remembers how I like my coffee, and it's close to home." Marcus paused. "Is this too weird, being somewhere like this?" Eleanor considered the question seriously. "It's different, but good different. I can't remember the last time I ate somewhere that felt so lived in. Like people actually come here because they want to, not because they're supposed to." "What kind of places are you supposed to eat at?" Places where they know your family name. Places where you need reservations weeks in advance. Places where people go to be seen. Eleanor wrinkled her nose. Places where they serve tiny portions on huge plates. Diane would have something to say about that. She believes in feeding people properly. Their food arrived quickly. Eleanor's eyes widened when she saw the bowl of chili, thick, dark, and steaming. Marcus's meatloaf came with mashed potatoes and green beans, comfort food at its finest. Eleanor took a careful spoonful of chili and immediately reached for her water. "Oh my God," she gasped. Wow. Too much?" "No, it's good. Really good. Just powerful." She took another spoonful. This one smaller. "I can see why you warned me." They ate and talked about everything and nothing. Eleanor asked about his work, and Marcus told her about the elderly couple whose house he'd secured last week, how they'd insisted he stay for lunch and look at photos of their grandchildren. Eleanor talked about her art history degree, how she'd wanted to work in a museum, but her family had needed her to handle business instead. "Do you regret it?" Marcus asked. "Not following that dream?" "Sometimes. But I don't know if it was really my dream, or just something I thought I should want." Eleanor stirred her chili thoughtfully. "What about you? Did you always want to install security systems?" "Not exactly. I wanted to be a police officer when I was a kid. But after my parents died..." Marcus shrugged. "I needed something steadier, something I could build on my own. This business lets me help people and be my own boss. That's enough for me. That's more than enough. That's everything." The way she said it made Marcus look at her more closely. "When was the last time you felt like you had everything?" Eleanor was quiet for so long that Marcus wondered if she'd answer. Finally, she said, "Right now. Sitting here eating chili that's trying to kill me, talking with you. This feels like everything." Something warm spread through Marcus's chest. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his. "Eleanor, I know it's crazy," she said quickly. "I know we barely know each other. I know this is all new and strange. But I haven't felt this normal in years." "You feel pretty normal to me," Marcus said. "Normal and beautiful and real." She turned her hand over so their palms touched. "Even with all the complications?" "Even with all the complications." They walked slowly after dinner, neither ready for the evening to end. Eleanor had parked 3 blocks away, claiming she'd wanted the walk. The night was clear and warm, perfect for wandering through Marcus's neighborhood. "I used to play basketball there," Marcus said, pointing to a court behind a community center. "Still do sometimes when the guys get a game together. Do you think?" Eleanor hesitated. "Would it be weird if I came to watch sometime?" Marcus stopped walking. "You'd want to do that?" "I want to see more of your world, if you'll let me." "What about your world? Will I get to see more of that?" Eleanor was quiet for a moment. "Would you want to? It's not all penthouses and fancy cars. Most of it's pretty boring, actually. Board meetings and charity events and family dinners where everyone's polite but nobody says what they really think." "Sounds lonely." "It is. That's why this," she gestured between them, "feels so important. You see me, Marcus. Not what I own or what I represent, just me." They'd reached her car, a modest sedan that probably cost more than Marcus made in several months, but looked almost ordinary parked on his street. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said. "Where do we go from here? I mean, we're from completely different worlds. How does this work?" Eleanor stepped closer to him. "I don't know, but I'd like to find out, if you would. Even if it's complicated. Especially if it's complicated. Easy things aren't usually worth having." Marcus smiled. "Is that something rich people say?" "It's something lonely people say when they find someone worth the risk." He kissed her then, soft and careful, right there on the sidewalk under the streetlights. She tasted like cinnamon from the chili and possibility. When they broke apart, Marcus felt like something fundamental had shifted in his world. "I'll call you tomorrow," he said. "You better." Marcus watched her drive away, then walked the remaining blocks to his building. Mrs. Johnson was watering her plants on the front porch. "That's a pretty girl," she said with a knowing smile. "She seems nice." "She is nice." "Good. You deserve nice, Marcus. You work too hard to settle for anything less." In his apartment, Marcus replayed the evening in his mind. The way Eleanor had tackled the chili like a challenge. How she'd really looked at Tony's diner, seeing value in its worn comfort. The way her hand felt in his. The kiss that had surprised them both. Ben called just as Marcus was getting ready for bed. "How'd it go?" "Good. Really good. And I think I might be falling for her, complications and all. About time you fell for someone worth falling for." "Ben? Yeah? What if I'm not enough? What if her family hates me? What if I embarrass her in front of her rich friends?" "Then she's not the woman you think she is. But from what you've told me, I think she might be exactly the woman you think she is." After Ben hung up, Marcus lay in bed thinking about Eleanor's world and his world, and how two such different places might somehow overlap. He didn't have answers yet, but for the first time in a long time, he had hope. And sometimes hope was enough to start with. 3 days later, Eleanor stood in her penthouse kitchen, actually attempting to cook. Rosa watched with barely concealed amusement as Eleanor struggled to chop an onion without crying. "Mija, you know I can do this for you," Rosa said gently. "I want to learn," Eleanor insisted, wiping her eyes with the back of her hand. "Marcus mentioned he likes to cook. I thought maybe." "Ah." Rosa's smile was knowing. "You want to cook for your man. He's not we're not." Eleanor gave up protesting. "Maybe, eventually, if I don't poison him with my cooking first." "What are you making?" "Pasta with marinara sauce. It seemed simple enough." Rosa moved to stand beside Eleanor at the counter. "Here, let me show you. Like this. See? You want the pieces all the same size so they cook evenly." For the next hour, Rosa patiently taught Eleanor the basics of cooking a simple meal. How to sauté garlic without burning it. How to tell when pasta was perfectly al dente. How to taste for seasoning. Eleanor found herself enjoying the process. The way the kitchen filled with good smells. The satisfaction of creating something with her own hands. "There," Rosa said, as Eleanor plated the finished pasta. "Not bad for a first try." Eleanor took a bite and smiled. It wasn't gourmet, but it was hers. She'd made it herself, without help from a chef or expensive ingredients, just simple food made with care. Her phone buzzed, a text from Marcus, "Working late tonight. Missing you." Eleanor stared at the message, warmth spreading through her chest. He missed her. This man who'd known her for less than a week missed her company. "Miss you too," she typed back, "learning to cook. Rosa says I might not burn down the kitchen after all. Brave woman. What are you making?" "Pasta. Want to come try it?" "Fair warning. It might be terrible." The response came quickly. "I'll be there in an hour. Even terrible pasta sounds good if you made it." Eleanor's heart raced. Marcus was coming back to the penthouse, but this time felt different. She'd invited him into her space, not surprised him with it. She spent the next hour cleaning the kitchen and trying not to panic. Rosa helped her set a simple table in the smaller dining room, the one with windows facing west where they could watch the sunset. "You're nervous," Rosa observed as Eleanor adjusted the napkins for the third time. "What if he thinks I'm trying too hard? What if this is too much too soon? Mija, listen to me. This man likes you. Not your money, not your penthouse. You. Trust that." When Marcus arrived, he came alone. No security escort, no formal announcement. Just Marcus, carrying a small bouquet of daisies from the grocery store, looking slightly uncertain in the marble lobby. "These are beautiful," Eleanor said, accepting the flowers. "Thank you." "I wasn't sure what to bring. Seemed weird to show up empty-handed." Eleanor led him to the kitchen, where the simple meal was waiting. The pasta looked modest on the elegant plates, but it smelled like home. "You really cooked this yourself?" Marcus asked, taking his first bite. "With significant help from Rosa. But I did the actual cooking." Eleanor held her breath, waiting for his verdict. "It's good, really good. You should be proud of yourself." The praise meant more than it should have. Eleanor realized she'd been seeking his approval, wanting him to see her as capable of normal things. "It's nothing fancy. The best things usually aren't." They ate by the windows as the sun set over the city. The light turned golden, then pink, then purple, painting the sky in colors Eleanor had seen thousands of times, but never really noticed. Somehow, having Marcus beside her made everything more vivid. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus said as they finished eating. "Of course. What's it like, growing up with all this?" He gestured around the penthouse. "I'm trying to understand your world." Eleanor considered the question. "Lonely," she said finally. "You're always aware that people might want something from you. You learn to be careful about trust. And you feel guilty a lot. Guilty for having more than others. Guilty for not appreciating it enough. Guilty for wanting normal things. What normal things do you want? To cook dinner for someone I care about. To ride the bus sometimes. To make mistakes without everyone watching. To fall in love without wondering if it's real." Marcus reached across the table and took her hand. "Is it? Real, I mean?" Eleanor's breath caught. Were they really having this conversation? Were they really acknowledging what was happening between them? "It feels real," she whispered. "With you, everything feels real." "Good, because I'm falling for you, Eleanor. Not for this." He gestured around the penthouse. "But for you. The woman who tackles chili like it's a personal challenge. The woman who learns to cook because she wants to do something nice for someone she cares about. Even though I'm complicated? Especially because you're complicated. Easy isn't interesting." Eleanor stood up and moved around the table to where Marcus sat. She'd never been this bold before, never been the one to make the first move. But something about the golden light, and the simple meal, and the way Marcus looked at her, made her brave. "Eleanor," he said softly as she stopped beside his chair. Instead of answering, she leaned down and kissed him. This kiss was different from the one outside Tony's diner, deeper, more certain. This was the kiss of two people who'd decided to risk everything for the chance of something real. When they broke apart, Marcus pulled her down onto his lap, holding her close. Eleanor could feel his heartbeat against her chest, fast and strong. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be in a relationship with someone who doesn't understand my world. Then we'll figure it out together, one day at a time. What if my family doesn't accept you? What if mine doesn't accept you?" Eleanor pulled back to look at him. "You have family. An aunt in Chicago, some cousins, friends who are like family. Ben would probably adopt you if I asked him to, but some of the others." Marcus shrugged. "Some people might have opinions about me dating someone like you." Eleanor hadn't considered that. She'd been so worried about Marcus fitting into her world that she hadn't thought about whether she'd fit into his. "So we both have challenges," she said. "We do." "But Eleanor?" Marcus cupped her face in his hands. "I think you're worth all of them. You barely know me. I know enough. I know you're kind and smart and funny. I know you make me feel like the best version of myself. I know I want to see where this goes." Eleanor kissed him again, softer this time, full of promise. Outside the windows, The city lights began to twinkle like earthbound stars. For the first time since inheriting the penthouse, Eleanor felt like she was really home. "Stay," she whispered against his lips. "Not for anything dramatic. Just stay. We can watch a movie or talk or just sit here. I want to fall asleep knowing you're here." Marcus smiled. "I'd like that." They moved to the living room, to the comfortable couch that faced the windows. Eleanor curled up against Marcus's side, feeling safe and content in a way she'd forgotten was possible. They talked quietly as the night deepened around them, about dreams and fears and all the small details that make up a life. Sometime around midnight, Eleanor dozed off with her head on Marcus's shoulder. He held her carefully, watching her sleep, marveling at how perfectly she fit against him, despite all the ways their lives didn't match. When Eleanor woke in the morning, she was covered with a soft throw blanket, and Marcus was gone. For a moment, panic fluttered in her chest. Had he left? Had reality set in overnight and convinced him this was all too complicated? Then she smelled coffee brewing and heard quiet movement in the kitchen. She found Marcus there, fully dressed but moving around her kitchen like he belonged there, making coffee and what looked like scrambled eggs. "Good morning," he said, turning to smile at her. "I hope you don't mind. I was hungry, and I figured you might be too." Eleanor's heart swelled. He'd stayed. He'd made himself at home. He'd taken care of her in the simple, everyday way that meant more than any grand gesture. "I don't mind," she said, meaning it completely. "I don't mind at all." And as Marcus handed her a cup of coffee made exactly the way she liked it, somehow he'd remembered from yesterday, Eleanor realized she was already more than halfway to being in love with him. The question now was whether love would be enough to bridge the gap between their two very different worlds. The next 2 weeks felt like a dream Eleanor didn't want to wake up from. She and Marcus fell into an easy rhythm. Coffee dates at the little cafe, dinners at Tony's diner, long walks through his neighborhood where kids played on stoops and neighbors called out greetings. Eleanor discovered she loved the way people knew each other here, how Mrs. Johnson always asked about Marcus's work, and how the corner store owner saved the best apples for regular customers. Marcus, for his part, seemed genuinely interested in learning about Eleanor's world. He listened without judgment when she talked about board meetings and family obligations. He even agreed to attend a small gallery opening with her. Nothing too formal, just an artist friend of hers showcasing new work. They were careful with each other, both aware they were building something fragile and important. Eleanor made sure never to overwhelm Marcus with her wealth, while Marcus made sure never to make Eleanor feel guilty for having it. It was a delicate balance, but it seemed to be working. Until the morning everything changed. Eleanor was having breakfast with Marcus in her penthouse when her phone rang. Lydia Whitmore's name appeared on the screen, and Eleanor's stomach immediately tightened. Her aunt never called this early unless something was wrong. "I should take this," Eleanor said apologetically. "It's my aunt." "Go ahead," Marcus said, sipping his coffee and looking out at the city. Eleanor answered on the third ring. "Aunt Lydia, is everything okay?" "Eleanor, dear, we need to talk. Can you come by the house this morning?" There was something in Lydia's voice, a cold formality that Eleanor recognized from childhood. It meant trouble. "What's this about?" "I'd rather discuss it in person. Shall we say 10 o'clock? Eleanor glanced at Marcus, who was pretending not to listen, but obviously picking up on her tension. "Can it wait until this afternoon? I have plans this morning." "I'm afraid it can't wait. This is about your new friend." 10 o'clock, Eleanor. Don't be late." The line went dead. Eleanor stared at her phone, dread settling in her stomach like a cold stone. "Everything okay?" Marcus asked. "I'm not sure." Eleanor forced a smile. "Family stuff. Nothing urgent." But as she got dressed to leave, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that everything was about to change. Lydia's tone suggested she knew about Marcus, and that she didn't approve. The Whitmore family mansion sat on 2 acres in the most exclusive part of the city. Eleanor had grown up in this house, but it had never felt like home. Too big, too formal, too full of expectations she could never quite meet. Lydia was waiting in the morning room, perfectly dressed despite the early hour. At 55, she was still beautiful in the sharp, careful way of women who'd never had to worry about money. She'd been managing Eleanor's trust since her grandmother's death, and she took that responsibility seriously. "Eleanor, darling." Lydia's smile was warm, but her eyes were calculating. "You look well, relaxed. Thank you." Eleanor sat across from her aunt, accepting coffee from the silent housekeeper. "What did you want to discuss?" "Your new boyfriend, Marcus Reed." Eleanor kept her face carefully neutral. "What about him?" "I had him investigated." The words hit Eleanor like a slap. "You what?" "It's standard procedure, dear. Anyone who gets close to our family undergoes a background check, for security purposes." "That's..." Eleanor struggled to find words through her shock and anger. "That's a violation of his privacy. You had no right." "I had every right. I'm responsible for protecting this family's interests, including yours." Lydia reached for a folder on the side table. "Mr. Reed is 32 years old, owns a small security business, lives in a rental apartment. No criminal record, no debts, no obvious red flags." "Then what's the problem?" Lydia's expression hardened. "The problem, Eleanor, is that he doesn't belong in our world. He's working class, poorly educated, with no family wealth or connections. What could he possibly offer you besides the novelty of dating beneath your station?" Eleanor felt heat rise in her cheeks. "He offers me honesty, kindness, real conversation, things that apparently don't exist in our world. Don't be naive, Eleanor. Men like Marcus Reed see women like you as lottery tickets. He's probably planning how to get access to your money as we speak." "Now that's not true." Eleanor stood up, too angry to sit still. "You don't know him. And you've known him for what, 2 weeks? Long enough to fall for whatever act he's putting on?" Lydia's voice turned sharp. "I've seen this before, Eleanor. Young women from good families thinking they can find authenticity by slumming with inappropriate men. It never ends well." "Slumming." Eleanor felt sick. "Is that what you think I'm doing?" "I think you're lonely and confused, and making poor decisions that could damage this family's reputation. I also think Mr. Reed is taking advantage of your isolation." Eleanor wanted to defend Marcus, to explain how genuine he was, how carefully he'd avoided taking advantage of her wealth. But doubt crept into her mind. What if Lydia was right? What if Marcus was playing a longer game than she'd realized? No. She pushed the thought away. She knew Marcus. She'd seen how uncomfortable he was with her wealth, how he insisted on paying his own way. Lydia was wrong. "I won't stop seeing him," Eleanor said quietly. "Then you're forcing me to take more direct action." Lydia reached for another folder. "Mr. Reed's business operates under several city licenses. It would be unfortunate if those licenses were suddenly under review. His rental agreement also comes up for renewal next month. Landlords can be very particular about tenants these days." Eleanor stared at her aunt in horror. "You're threatening him." "I'm protecting you, and protecting our family's reputation. By destroying an innocent man's life. By removing a threat to your judgment and our family's standing." Lydia's voice turned gentle, which somehow made her words more terrifying. "Eleanor, darling, I understand the appeal of ordinary men. They seem so real, so uncomplicated. But relationships across class lines don't work. They create too many problems, too many conflicts. You need someone who understands your world, your responsibilities." Eleanor thought about Marcus making coffee in her kitchen, about the way he'd held her while she slept, about his genuine interest in her thoughts and dreams. Everything real in her life centered around him now. "Give me time," she said finally. "Don't do anything to hurt Marcus. Just Give me time to think. Lydia smiled, sensing victory. Of course, dear. Take all the time you need. But don't take too long. These situations have a way of becoming more complicated the longer they continue. Eleanor left the mansion feeling like she was drowning. She sat in her car for 10 minutes, trying to process what had just happened. Her own family was threatening the man she was falling in love with. The people who claimed to protect her were ready to destroy someone else's life to control hers. She drove aimlessly through the city, ending up at the little cafe where she and Marcus had shared their first real conversation. The cheerful normalcy of the place felt surreal now. How could she have thought their two worlds could coexist? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. Hope your family thing went okay. Still on for dinner tonight? Eleanor stared at the message, her heart breaking. How could she tell him that her family saw him as a threat? How could she explain that his very existence in her life was being treated as a problem to be solved? Actually, can we postpone? Something came up. Sure. Everything okay? Fine. Just tired. Rain check? Of course. Get some rest. Eleanor turned off her phone and sat in the cafe, watching ordinary people live ordinary lives. For the first time since meeting Marcus, she wondered if love really was enough to overcome the differences between them. And for the first time, she wasn't sure of the answer. That evening, Marcus called Ben from his apartment. Something's wrong, he said without preamble. What kind of wrong? Eleanor. She's been distant today. Short texts, canceled dinner. Something happened this morning after I left her place. Maybe she just had a bad day. No, it's more than that. When she left this morning, she seemed nervous about talking to her aunt. When she came back... Marcus paused, trying to put his finger on what had changed. When she came back, she looked at me differently. Different, how? Like she was seeing me for the first time, or like she was seeing something she didn't like. Ben was quiet for a moment. You think her family got to her? I think someone said something that made her question whatever this is between us. Marcus stared out his apartment window at the familiar street below. I knew this would happen eventually. I knew her world would catch up to us. So, what are you going to do? I don't know. Give her space, I guess. See if she figures out what she wants. That's it? You're just going to wait? What else can I do, Ben? Storm her penthouse and demand to know what's wrong? Force her to choose between me and her family? Marcus shook his head. If Eleanor doesn't want to be with me, I can't make her. And if she's having doubts, maybe those doubts are telling her something important. Or maybe someone's filling her head with garbage about why you're not good enough for her. Maybe I'm not good enough for her. Marcus. Ben's voice turned sharp. Don't you dare. You're one of the best men I know. If Eleanor can't see that, then she's not worth your time. But as Marcus hung up and got ready for bed, he couldn't shake the feeling that Eleanor was worth any amount of trouble. The question was whether she felt the same way about him. 2 days passed with minimal contact between them. Eleanor sent polite but distant texts. Marcus responded with equal politeness, not wanting to pressure her, but hoping she'd explain what had changed. On the 3rd day, Eleanor finally called. Can we meet? She asked without preamble. Of course. Where? The cafe. Our cafe. In an hour. I'll be there. Marcus arrived early and chose their usual corner table. When Eleanor walked in, she looked exhausted, pale, with dark circles under her eyes, like she hadn't been sleeping. She'd dressed simply, but even in jeans and a sweater, she carried herself with the careful control that meant she was holding something back. Thank you for meeting me, she said, sitting across from him. Eleanor, what's going on? You've been different since Tuesday morning. She looked down at her hands. My aunt had you investigated. The words hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. She what? A background check. She knows everything about you, your business, your apartment, your finances. Eleanor's voice was flat, emotionless. She thinks you're using me. Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. And what do you think? Eleanor finally looked up at him, and Marcus saw tears in her eyes. I think I'm scared. Of me? Of what being with you means. Of what my family will do. Of whether... She stopped, unable to finish. Of whether your aunt is right, Marcus said quietly. No, that's not. Eleanor wiped her eyes. Marcus, I know you're not using me. I know you care about me for who I am, not what I have. But that doesn't make this easier. Marcus leaned back in his chair, processing what she was telling him. Your family threatened me, didn't they? Eleanor's silence was answer enough. What did they say they'd do? It doesn't matter. It does to me. Eleanor looked out the window, watching people walk by on the sidewalk. They could make things difficult for your business, your apartment. They have influence, Marcus. More than you realize. Marcus felt anger rise in his throat, but he pushed it down. Getting angry wouldn't help either of them. And you're worried I can't handle whatever they might do. I'm worried about what fighting them would cost you. And I'm worried about what it would cost me. There it was. The truth Eleanor had been dancing around. Marcus nodded slowly, understanding flooding through him. You're not ready to choose between me and your family. I shouldn't have to choose, Eleanor said, but her voice lacked conviction. But you do have to choose. That's what this is about, isn't it? Your aunt made it clear that I don't belong in your world, and she's right. That's not. It is. Marcus reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. Eleanor, I've known from the beginning that we come from different worlds. I've known that your family might not accept me, that there would be challenges, but I thought what we had was strong enough to face those challenges together. It is strong enough, Eleanor said desperately. What we have is real, Marcus. It's the most real thing in my life. Then what are we talking about here? Eleanor pulled her hand away from his. We're talking about whether love is enough, whether caring about each other is worth the complications it brings. Marcus felt something break inside his chest. And you don't think it is. I think I'm terrified of losing everything I've ever known for something that might not work out. So you're choosing safety over risk. Your family over me. I'm choosing to be realistic about what we're asking of each other. Eleanor's voice rose slightly. You're asking me to potentially give up my family, my security, my entire support system. What are you giving up? What are you risking? The question stung, because Marcus knew she was partly right. He was asking her to risk more than he was. But that didn't make her decision hurt any less. You're right, he said quietly. I'm not risking as much as you are. My family is just Ben and a few friends. My world is smaller, simpler, easier to leave behind if I had to. Eleanor looked stricken. I didn't mean... Yes, you did. And you're not wrong. Marcus stood up, suddenly needing to be anywhere but sitting across from Eleanor, watching her choose safety over him. But Eleanor, you're not just choosing between me and your family. You're choosing between the person you are with me and the person you've always been. You're choosing between taking a risk on love and staying safe in loneliness. That's not fair, isn't it? You told me yourself that you were lonely, that you felt like you were managing your life instead of living it. With me, you cook dinner and eat chili that makes you cry and laugh until your sides hurt. Without me, you go back to board meetings and charity events and being polite to people who don't really see you. Eleanor was crying now, tears sliding down her cheeks. Marcus, please. You're making this sound like it's easy. It's not easy. It's the hardest thing either of us will ever do. But Eleanor, if you walk away from this, from us, because it's complicated, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. And if I choose you and lose everything else, if my family cuts me off, if I can't handle your world any better than you can handle mine? Marcus looked at her for a long moment, memorizing her face. Then at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have been brave enough to see what love could do. He reached for his wallet, but Eleanor stopped him. Please don't go. Not like this. Eleanor, you've already made your choice. You made it the moment you started talking about risks and complications instead of talking about us. Marcus's voice was gentle but firm. I understand why you're scared. I even understand why you're choosing safety. But I can't sit here and watch you talk yourself out of the best thing that's ever happened to either of us. Marcus, I love you, he said simply. I love your laugh, and your terrible cooking and the way you tackle new things like personal challenges. I love that you see beauty in ordinary places, and that you make me feel like the best version of myself. I love you enough to fight for us, even when it's hard. Especially when it's hard. Eleanor sobbed openly now. I love you too. That's what makes this so impossible. No, Eleanor. Love is what makes it possible. Everything else is just details we figure out as we go. Marcus walked to the door, then turned back. When you decide what you really want, not what's safe, not what's expected, but what you really want, call me. I'll be here. And then he was gone, leaving Eleanor alone at their table with cold coffee and the weight of the biggest decision of her life. Eleanor sat in the cafe for over an hour after Marcus left, staring at the cold coffee and replaying their conversation. Other customers came and went. Students with laptops, friends catching up, people living normal lives that didn't require choosing between love and security. When she finally drove home, the penthouse felt different, emptier. The luxury that had once comforted her now seemed cold and meaningless. She found herself in the kitchen, where Marcus had made her breakfast just days ago, touching the counter where he'd stood, remembering the easy way he'd moved through her space. Rosa found her there, as the sun was setting. Mija, you look terrible, Rosa said gently. What happened? Eleanor told her everything, about Lydia's threats, about the investigation, about the impossible choice she was being forced to make. Rosa listened without judgment, occasionally making soft sounds of sympathy. So he's gone? Rosa asked when Eleanor finished. I didn't ask him to go. I couldn't promise him I'd choose him over everything else. And he couldn't accept anything less. Can you blame him? The question surprised Eleanor. I thought you'd understand. You know what my family is like. You know what they're capable of. I do know. I've worked for this family for 10 years, remember? I've seen how they treat people who don't meet their standards. Rosa sat down across from Eleanor. I've also seen how lonely you've been, how empty this beautiful house feels most days. But if I choose Marcus, I might lose everything else. My family, my security, my entire life. And if you choose your family, you lose the first real love you've ever found. Rosa reached across the table and took Eleanor's hand. Mija, let me ask you something. 5 years from now, which choice will you regret more? Eleanor closed her eyes, trying to imagine her future. Without Marcus, she'd returned to the careful, controlled life she'd always known. Board meetings and charity events and polite conversations with people who saw her as a symbol rather than a person. Safe, predictable, and utterly lonely. With Marcus, everything was uncertain. Her family might cut her off. She might struggle to fit into his world. They might discover that love wasn't enough to bridge the gap between their different lives. But with Marcus, she'd felt alive in a way she'd never experienced before. I'm scared, Rosa. Of course you are. Love is terrifying. It asks us to risk everything for something we can't control. Rosa squeezed Eleanor's hand. But Mija, what's the point of having everything if you have no one real to share it with? That night, Eleanor couldn't sleep. She walked through the penthouse, looking at the expensive furniture and artwork that had never brought her happiness. She stood at the windows, looking out at the city lights, thinking about Marcus in his small apartment, probably wondering if she'd find the courage to fight for what they had. She thought about calling him a dozen times. But what would she say? That she loved him, but wasn't brave enough to risk everything for that love? That she wanted to be with him, but only if it didn't cost her too much? The next morning, Lydia called again. "How are you feeling, dear? I hope you've had time to think about our conversation." Eleanor stared at herself in the bathroom mirror. Pale skin, hollow eyes, the look of someone who'd lost something precious. "I have." "Good. I know this is difficult, but you'll see I'm right eventually. There's a wonderful man I'd like you to meet, Charles Hammond. His family owns several hotels. Very appropriate, very suitable. I'm not interested in meeting anyone else." There was a pause. "Eleanor, you haven't done anything foolish, have you? You haven't made any promises to Mr. Reed. I ended things with him yesterday." "Oh, darling, I'm so proud of you. I know it wasn't easy, but you made the right choice." Had she? Sitting in her empty penthouse, feeling like a stranger in her own life, Eleanor wasn't sure she'd made the right choice at all. "Lydia, can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Have you ever been in love? Real love, not just marriage for social reasons." Another pause. "Eleanor, what a question. Of course I loved your uncle." "But did you choose him? Or did the family choose him for you?" We were very compatible. We came from similar backgrounds, shared similar values. Love grew from that foundation." "That's not what I asked." Lydia's voice turned sharp. "Eleanor, what's brought this on? You sound like you're questioning everything our family stands for." Eleanor looked around the penthouse, at the marble and crystal and priceless art that surrounded her like beautiful prison bars. "Maybe I am." "Don't be ridiculous. You're upset about ending things with Mr. Reed, but you'll see." "What if I don't see? What if I decide that what I had with Marcus is worth more than what I have without him?" "Then you'd be making a terrible mistake that would cost you everything." "Everything? Or just everything that doesn't really matter?" Lydia's voice turned icy. "I think you need some time to clear your head, Eleanor. Perhaps a trip would help. I could arrange something. Paris, maybe. Or the house in Martha's Vineyard. Running away won't change how I feel. It will give you perspective. Help you remember who you are and where you belong." After Lydia hung up, Eleanor sat in her living room, feeling the weight of generations of Whitmore expectations pressing down on her. Her grandmother's portrait looked down from above the fireplace. A beautiful woman who'd married appropriately, lived appropriately, and died surrounded by wealth, but, Eleanor suspected, not much happiness. Was that the life Eleanor wanted? Safe, respectable, and empty of real love? Her phone buzzed. A text from Marcus. "Saw Mrs. Johnson at the store today. She asked about you. Said to tell you that you're welcome in the neighborhood any time." Eleanor stared at the message, tears blurring her vision. Even after everything, Marcus was being kind. He wasn't angry or bitter. He was still thinking of her, still including her in his world even though she'd chosen not to be part of it. She typed and deleted a dozen responses. Finally, she settled on. "Tell her thank you. That means a lot. Always." One word, but it held everything. Forgiveness, understanding, and the promise that his feelings for her hadn't changed, even if her courage had failed them both. 3 days passed in a blur of empty hours. Eleanor went through the motions of her regular life, attended a board meeting, had lunch with family friends, reviewed investment portfolios. But everything felt mechanical, like she was watching someone else live her life. On Friday evening, she found herself driving through Marcus's neighborhood. She told herself she was just getting some air, but her car seemed to know where it wanted to go. She parked across from Tony's diner and sat watching through the windows. Marcus was there, sitting in their usual booth. But he wasn't alone. A woman sat across from him. Attractive, well-dressed, laughing at something he'd said. Eleanor felt jealousy twist in her stomach, sharp and immediate. Of course he was moving on. Of course he wouldn't wait around for someone who'd been too scared to choose him. Eleanor had given up the right to feel possessive when she'd chosen safety over love. But watching Marcus smile at another woman made Eleanor realize something crucial. She wasn't protecting herself from heartbreak by staying away from him. Her heart was already broken. The only question was whether she'd broken it for something worthwhile. As Eleanor watched, Marcus's companion reached across the table and touched his hand. The gesture was intimate, familiar. Eleanor felt physically sick. She started her car and drove home, tears streaming down her face. She'd lost him. She'd been so busy protecting herself from the risk of loving him that she'd guaranteed the loss of him. Back in the penthouse, Eleanor went straight to her bedroom and allowed herself to fall apart completely. She cried for the love she'd thrown away, for the life she'd been too scared to claim, for the woman she'd revealed herself to be when tested. She cried until she had no tears left, and then she lay in the dark, staring at the ceiling, and finally understanding what she'd done. She'd chosen fear over love, safety over happiness, other people's expectations over her own heart. And now it was too late to choose differently. But as Eleanor drifted toward an exhausted sleep, a small voice in the back of her mind whispered a question that would change everything. Was it really too late? Or was she just telling herself that to avoid having to be brave? The answer would come tomorrow. Tonight, Eleanor just held on to the possibility that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to fight for the love she'd been too scared to claim. Maybe it wasn't too late to choose happiness over safety. Maybe it wasn't too late to choose Marcus over fear. The thought was terrifying and hopeful in equal measure. And for the first time in days, it let Eleanor finally fall asleep.